Why Russia and China side with Iran? For the first time in history, the United States could impose its will on the world. The Cold War was over, and with the collapse of the Soviet Union, the United States was the world's sole remaining superpower. But the world kept spinning, and now there were challengers to the US-led unipolar order: Russia, China, Iraq. This triangle is more interconnected than ever. In March 2024, more than 20 warships from the three countries gathered in the Gulf of Oman and the Arabian Sea for joint exercises. It was like a challenge when NATO was deploying operations with the participation of new member Sweden. What does it mean for these three countries to come together, especially in the context of the war in the Middle East? And can their relationship deepen, even become a formal alliance like NATO? Or is it just a convenient, situational cooperation? To understand the nature of this triangular relationship, we have no choice but to look at the history of each country. Once upon a time, the Russian Empire was one of the great powers that took advantage of China's decline in the 19th and 20th centuries. To this day, the Chinese still regret the lands that the Qing dynasty ceded to Russia, typically the Primorsky Krai region in the capital city of Vladivostok. It was not just emotional bitterness, because in addition to Manchuria becoming Russian territory, China had officially lost its trade route to the Sea of Japan. During the Civil War, the Soviet Union chose to support Mao Zedong with the victory of the communist side. The two countries were close friends, but that friendship did not last long. In the mid-1950s, ideological rifts emerged after Nikita Khrushchev took over the Soviet Union. Tensions escalated thereafter, leading the two countries into open hostility, even leading to military clashes in 1969. The rift was so severe that Mao Zedong sought to normalize relations with the United States in 1972 to balance against the Soviet Union. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, relations between Russia and China gradually improved because they shared interests in many areas. On the other side of the triangle, Russia and Iran were historically rivals. However, Iran eventually fell into internal instability and chaos, unable to compete with the Russian Empire and later the Soviet Union. After the Islamic Revolution, Iran had no intention of holding on to its share of the land. Despite its open hostility toward the United States, Iran still viewed the Soviet Union as something to be wary of. However, the collapse of the Soviet Union and Russia's gradual turn against the West brought the two countries closer together. China and Iran are another interesting story. The legendary Silk Road linked China to Iran and ended in Europe. In other words, Iran is like a transit point on the bridge between the two civilizations of the East and the West. As humanity entered the modern era, just like the relationship between Russia, China, and Russia, the relationship between China and Iran only really flourished in the 21st century after China wanted to assert its position on the global stage. So how did this triangle begin? In 1997, Russia began to abandon it towards the West and became increasingly dissatisfied with NATO's expansion into its former Eastern European satellites. At that time, China began to realize its ambition to transform itself from an economic power to a geopolitical force. The two sides signed a joint declaration on a multipolar world and the establishment of a new international order based on respect for sovereignty, non-interference in internal affairs, and the right of a state to choose its own path of development. In 2001, Russia and China signed a treaty on good neighborly cooperation. Notably, the treaty implies military cooperation in case of a threat against either country. Russia and China have also founded two important organizations. One is the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, SCO, and the other is the BRIC Group, a geopolitical organization of major emerging economies that aims to change the world order from unipolarity to multipolarity. Such organizations have become important platforms for military, economic, and energy cooperation. You see, China's giant mouth is always hungry for energy resources, and Russia conveniently satisfies this thirst. Therefore, it is natural for China and Russia to establish an energy partnership. Besides, Russia also plays an important role in China's Belt and Road Initiative that connects China to European markets. Cooperation in the financial sector is also worth mentioning. Even before the West isolated Russia over the war in Ukraine, It avoided using the dollar in its trade. Russia's exclusion from the SWIFT international payment system has accelerated the process of de-dollarization. Russia and China have agreed to trade gas in local currencies. By the end of 2023, Russia and China will almost completely eliminate the dollar from bilateral trade. Economic cooperation is good, but any strategic alliance cannot succeed without significant military cooperation. In 2015, Russia began selling Su-35 fighters and S-400 air defense systems to China. In 2018, Russia conducted the Vostok military exercises with China. These are just a few examples of how military cooperation is being strengthened. On the other hand, although Russia and Iran have historically been at odds, Russian sanctions imposed in 2014 over the annexation of Crimea and the war in Syria have brought them closer together. The two sides signed an oil for goods deal, in which Russia reportedly bought up to 500,000 barrels of Iranian oil per day. In return, Iran received Russian products. Russia is also said to be taking advantage of Iran's experience in circumventing sanctions, especially after launching the war in Ukraine. In the political and military spheres, the nuclear issue has been an obstacle to closer cooperation between the two countries. For example, one of the consequences of Iran's refusal to stop enriching uranium was the imposition of a UN ban on the sale of heavy weapons. Then Russian President Medvedev banned the sale of F-300 systems, military aircraft, and armored vehicles to Iran. But the story has changed. Especially in the war in Syria, both countries support President Assad and work closely to defeat efforts to overthrow him. On the battlefield in Ukraine, Iran is believed to have supplied Russia with some hot goods. Most recently, Western intelligence accused Iran of preparing to supply missiles to Russia, as Russia has sent personnel to Iran to be trained on systems developed by Tehran. Meanwhile, relations between China and Iran are also growing, especially in the energy sector, as China imports oil and gas from Iran to help the heavily sanctioned country survive. In 2021, the two countries signed a 25-year strategic partnership agreement, and China identified Iran as an alternative transit point for its Belt and Road project. As a result, Beijing has invested heavily in Iran's infrastructure, including subways, dams, and factories, and is involved in Iran's coal, zinc, and copper mining. In 2021, the three countries conducted 3 joint military exercises in the Indian Ocean and the Gulf of Oman. As of 2024, the three countries have conducted 5 joint military exercises. In addition, both the SCO and BRIC have admitted Iran. In short, what is drawing these three countries together? What Russia, Iran, and China have in common is the ability to act independently without depending on the West. China has emerged from a closed economy as a global industrial powerhouse, partnering with Western and Eastern companies to build a powerful economy. Iran, despite decades of economic sanctions, has developed its own technology, space, and military sectors independently. And Russia, with its important geopolitical and military position, has also maintained a high degree of autonomy in its decision-making. However, the relationship between these three countries is not based solely on economic or strategic interests. This bond is also driven by a shared vision of world order. All three countries reject the imposition of a unipolar order led by the United States, and instead support a multipolar world, where each country has its own sovereignty and is free from external interference. So the question is, now that the flames of war are spreading in the Middle East, with the two main regional rivals, Israel and Iran, directly engaged in a confrontation, will Russia and China jump in to support their ally Iran? There are many reasons to say that Russia has been the big winner since the conflict broke out in the Gaza Strip, at least in terms of distracting the West from the war in Ukraine, which they need to spend more time dealing with the situation in the Middle East. As we saw in April 2024, Israel attacked an Iranian consulate in Syria, killing senior Iranian military commanders, prompting Iran to respond by firing missiles at Israel for the first time. The two sides appear to be on the brink of a full-scale war, but Russia has not explicitly sided with Iran. Instead, Moscow has urged both Iran and Israel to exercise restraint. Russia may be okay with chaos in the Middle East, but when it comes to full-scale war, That is definitely not what it wants, for simple reasons. First, a direct conflict between Israel and Iran would limit Iran's ability to continue supplying Russia militarily. Not only that, Tehran could demand more support from Russia. Moreover, a full-blown conflict in the Middle East could create an opportunity for China to act as a mediator, as it did during the Saudi-Iranian peace talks in March 2023. Certainly, Russia will be particularly sensitive to Chinese efforts to compete with its influence in the Middle East. And besides, Russia remains focused on the Ukraine theater. All of which means that if necessary, Russia could support Iran in its confrontation with Israel. But this support will have its limits. Meanwhile, from China's perspective, the Middle East's cauldron is first and foremost a threat to the global economy and directly impacts China's already struggling growth. The best-case scenario for China is for the situation in the Middle East to cool down. Beijing will not intervene in the conflict, but instead use diplomatic tools to exploit the situation to show itself as a major power with an important voice in global affairs. In any case, we hope that the situation in the Middle East will stabilize soon, and relevant parties inside and outside the region will act with more restraint and sobriety. Because in an apocalyptic scenario, there are no winners. What do you think? Tell Global Insights in the comments below. Now, goodbye, and see you again.